Hey, welcome everyone. We're going to give it just a minute or two to let everybody file in, and we'll get started. If you'd like, if you want to go in the chat and just introduce yourself to everyone, let us know where you're from and any classes maybe you're currently teaching.
Which implies I really should go find the chat window somewhere here. That's why these intros to these things are very important. Cheryl and Geneva in the room. Welcome, welcome. Always fun to recognize names that are actually in the webinar.
Washington University. Awesome. All right. Well, as people continue to come in, UPenn, here we go. We'll go ahead and get started with some quick introductions and also a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll get started into the main part of the webinar. My name is David Green. I'm an account executive with Harmonize. With me today, I have Marcus, who is our CEO here at Harmonize, but then we also have Billy, Enno, and Peter, who are all from the University of Wisconsin, Madison School of Business. I think I got that right. I would put the order correct. Um, and they're here to share with us exactly how they're doing some of their classes and incorporating discussions both in their classroom, but then also using Harmonize and other tools to create discussion online. And so I know, Marcus, you said you kind of wanted to give a little background on this webinar a little bit, so I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, let me toss in sort of why I thought this was interesting, because this is a little different than what we normally do. Both of these guys are teaching in-person classes, and they're using online discussions as an addition to their in-person class. And this is something we talk about a lot, and like it's good learning science, right? You're continuing the conversation, you're giving sort of the quiet voices a chance to speak up, but we just don't see it happen very often. And so that's kind of why I wanted to highlight this. I wanted to be able to have a forum where people could ask questions of sort of the why, the how are you doing it, how do you feel like it impacts your class, those types of things, because it's not a super common practice. At least in my world, I don't have tons of data on this. So that's what interested me about that. This is why we picked it up, and I think actually the registration numbers sort of show that this is still an uncommon practice. So for those that have attended, we don't see a ton of people embracing this as an idea, even though it feels like such a great use of technology to augment sort of the in-person class. So hat tip to you for joining to be able to learn about this. Without, I don't think I have anything else to add to that. When we get into, actually, let me just lead in so I don't have to figure out a place to put this. The way we picked these two instructors is that we looked at the peer connectivity in their class. They are actually, compared to even some of the online classes, they're getting high peer connectivity in their classes. So they're getting lots of activity and lots of interconnectivity between their students. And so when we go try to find instructors, we reached out. And when we reached out, we then found out it was an in-person class. And that's what made us go, wait, okay, all right, fair enough. Move on from there. So both these gentlemen are very humble. They're like, I'm not doing anything special, but clearly the results are indicating something a little bit different than that. And so I think an interesting question to think about as we go through this is that we're seeing high peer connectivity in the online world. Is that because it's coming from a face-to-face class and they already have that foundation built? What is it that leads to that? We don't have any necessarily answers for those, but I think there may be more questions than answers that come up here. And some of those questions we're just not going to have an answer for, which is totally fine. So please put your questions out in the chat as we're going through it. David will be fielding those. And I think, David, you're going to handle sort of the interrupt the flow of conversation, or did you want me to take on part of that?
Yeah, I'll be doing some of that, and I'm also going to be sharing some screens where we can kind of demonstrate what Enno and Peter are doing in their classes. I'll make a note right now. I'm sure some of you who are in here today are not current Harmonize users, and that's fine. We What they're doing doesn't necessarily have to be done through Harmonize, but we're going to show you that just so you can have an example to understand what's going on. So I'll be driving that in the background. Um, Before we go into the actual meat of the conversation, Billy, did you want to say anything or introduce yourself and just kind of talk about what you guys are doing there in the school
Sure.
business in
I,
Madison?
I'd be glad to, David. Hello, all. My name is Billy Kardash. I'm Associate Director of our Schools Teaching and Learning and Assessment team. So basically, our instructional designers and technologists get to support the awesome instructors like Enno and Peter. So, I'm just sort of in the background with technical support, but I'm always willing to learn and offer a few opinions if I hear anything interesting. So thanks.
Awesome.
Bill,
Thank you so much, Billy. Um, Enno and Peter, whichever one of you want to start, if maybe you can give us a background, what you're teaching, and some of the things that you have seen in your class, and why you decided to incorporate some discussion into your classes.
sure, I'd be happy to start. And first of all, I want to say Billy is also incredibly humble. A lot of things in the School of Business would not happen without Billy Kardash. So, Billy, thank you. Um, my name is Enno Siemsen. I'm a faculty member in our Operations and Information Management department, and I teach a class on machine learning for business analytics. And I I want to say that this was actually last fall was the first time in a while that I've taught since I was in the dean's office for the past 6 years. So I'm a recovering dean or associate dean, um, and it was very clear to me during the this is in some sense a remnant from the pandemic, right? So during the pandemic, we all had to switch the mode of how we teach quite a bit, and I think our dean Samba was actually quite proactive at that time, and he challenged all of us to say, well, we're not just going to move to online. We want to figure out, are there sort of things that we can do for engagement that will make these classes, really, really good. And so we came up back then, sort of with a list of 7 things that we'll try to push among the faculty, and using, discussion forums was one of them. So Billy can attest to the fact that back then we were very actively looking at what is a good software that we can bring in over here. We were still kind of stuck with Canvas discussion forums, which are okay, but not particularly good. They're not, there's not a whole of analytics. They don't look very good. And so we were experimenting quite a bit with that. And the goal was really to keep students engaged throughout the week, right? And to Marcus, as you mentioned earlier, right? Um, as an instructor, you're always worried that if you engage people in the classroom, you get a certain set of extroverts that is like always there. Those are your go-to people. Those are the people you can rely upon, that the classroom isn't quiet. But there's also a much larger audience that remains quiet, right? And you have to find out ways of drawing them out. Of course, you can kind of cold call or warm call and so on. So the in-classroom techniques are how you can do that. But there's also, I think, discussion forums are a way for them where they can contribute, without standing in front of the whole audience, but they can, as more introverts maybe sit in their computers, think about what they want to contribute, and do that in the discussion forum. So long and short, I knew that using these forums, I'd experimented with it myself during the pandemic. I know a bunch of our faculty had experimented with it. And when I designed this course for the fall semester, it was actually no question for me. I was like, of course I'm going to use discussion forums. So, when you told me that this is something unique, I was like, really? I was quite surprised. Let's see. What are some of the real benefits of it, right? So the first one I talked about is you get a group of students to contribute that otherwise feel too shy to openly talk in the classroom. And this is particularly true in this class. we have a lot of business analytics students in this class, and they come from abroad. This is their first semester where they are in the United States. Their English isn't perfect yet, and they feel very self-conscious about it. And so there's a larger barrier to really contribute, right? So you want to give them a chance to still contribute. So that's one reason, but there's a second reason, which I think is almost as important, and that has to do with the timing of engagement. When I teach this class, I teach a single session per week for 2.5 hours, right? So it is very, in a sense, there's a class on Tuesday, and I technically don't see the students again until the next Tuesday. So if I don't do something that keeps students active and thinking throughout the week, I think the class can feel very episodic, right? I need to do something to draw them in throughout the week. And so what I do with the discussion forum is I give them, just another thing where, usually sometime over the weekend, they go back into the discussion forum, read the posts from their peers, think about it, comment about it, and prepare a post on their own. So those are, some of the key reasons that I do this. And I think you're pulling up one of my discussion forums over there as an example. So this was, so every week I create a prompt, and the prompt is designed to give them, something about the topics we covered in class to reflect about, and then basically do their own research, right? And write up more or less a short essay on something related to what we've covered in class. And so it's very clear. I mean, I have a separate quiz that they need to take. The quiz is very much about, this is what we covered in class. Do you understand the concepts, right? The discussion forum is not about that. It is about, can you extend these concepts? Can you think more broadly about them? And so here you have a prompt. I believe this is about classification problems, right? So the key here for them is to understand that there are some prediction problems which, deal with regression or sort of more continuous outcomes, and then there are classification problems which deal with predicting categorical outcomes. And that's a very important distinction in terms of understanding what what kind of models they'll be using later on. So this is a very early on topic, but I've kind of pushed them to, think about this more broadly. And here you actually have a very nice example where students, this was sort of the second session of this class where you can kind of see that they're really getting, the idea of prediction models and how useful prediction models are. And so some students over here went straight to recommender systems, right? They were like, well, recommender systems, if I watch Netflix, it predicts what I want to watch next. It predicts what I might like. How does that work? And so in the discussion forum over here, what you're pulling up is actually a very, very interesting discussion between students about recommender systems. And when I read that, I thought that was absolutely fascinating, and then decided to, a couple of weeks later, actually add a module on recommender systems into the class, because there was obviously a very clear student demand for it. This is maybe also a nice example of how the discussions forums actually help the students shape, in a sense, the content, the future content of the class, right? It's not only a way where I can ask them to reflect, it's also for me then a way to read about what are they actually really interested in, right? What do they find fascinating? And, I think as a good instructor, you always need to capitalize on that, right? If you find something that students really seem to find fascinating, then I think that should become part of your class, right? That's clearly something that motivates them. So that's sort of a little bit on how I use these discussion forums. I can maybe talk a little bit more briefly on how they are structured and how they integrate with sort of grading. David, if you think I should go ahead, then give me the thumbs up.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Can I
Okay.
don't want to throw a couple of questions out before you get into the logistics, because I do think that's important, but some things that I'm wondering. So like and this is me putting my own personal world onto this. I constantly have a conversation, then I wake up, 3 hours later in the middle of the night, and have an additional thought I wish I'd added. So even though I'm the extrovert in the room and I'm always having to stop myself and make space, I still have things to add. Do you find, like when you're reading through this, that the dominant voices in the classroom are also still dominant or participating and doing the most in the discussion forum, or is it not? Does that not seem to be the case? And I
That's
don't
an
know.
interesting.
I
Yeah,
was gonna say I
it's
don't
an
know as an
interesting
answer,
question.
but
I don't think there's actually something I could measure, and I haven't done that. So I'm going to take a little bit of a gut response to it. But I think the most memorable and interesting comments in the discussion forums came from students that were not very active participants otherwise in the classroom.
that's what I was hoping would happen.
I was gonna say, let me jump in. Let me jump on that one, and I'm gonna talk more later. But other stuff. There's introverted and extroverted, like how people perform at parties. But there's also just the how they think about stuff, and that's really like the Myers-Briggs I and E. And I's need to ponder and think about stuff before they respond. And what I find is, I mean, again, this is non-scientific, but I see lots of students across the spectrum, not just the loud extroverted people that are more willing to talk in class comment, but also I'll get like, 3-paragraph essays. I don't require that much of a response. I'm encouraged, I do grade them, but I encourage them just to do a minimal amount. But then I get really, really interesting, fun things, and they can be from those people because they've had time to think about and ponder it. Maybe it's at 3 a.m. I don't actually check the timestamps, Marcus, but
For me, it would be.
yeah, but you just get a lot of really interesting stuff, and like part of me like assumes, oh, is someone going to phone it in? And I mean, occasionally I read one that feels AI written, I'll be honest, but for the most part, I see people actually really pondering and thinking about it and providing some good, fun discussions, and they are much longer. Even for a more willing to speak in the classroom individual, we only have so much time. Whereas people will tell these stories that are 3, 4, 5 paragraphs long, and really demonstrates that they're learning the material and applying it to different situations. So it's not just the am I afraid to, but also do I have time to process before I come out, and that's also been a really nice benefit that I've seen.
If I may add a thought, from my technical lens, what I have found so interesting to see in these discussions, from accessibility, from a collaboration point of view of students who think differently, who express differently, you're seeing not just text anymore. You're seeing video posts, as for example, the YouTube link. Sometimes you'll see annotations. Sometimes you'll see the other Harmonize tools being used, polls, drawings. It's really refreshing to see, particularly from somebody who just doesn't think in the form of text, so it's a good thing to see.
Yeah, plug for UDL principles here. That I'll actually throw out a blog post from a webinar we did just a little bit ago. You mentioned AI written content, and that's probably on everyone's mind. But if you couple that with this idea that students express themselves differently, not just in text, you actually can create some discussion forums that are a little more resilient to AI. Nothing's AI proof, but and we put together a bunch of examples from that from an earlier webinar. I'm going to throw that out in the chat for folks to read later. But I think that's a super good point in that, like, essays doesn't have to be the thing, just like raising your hand and speaking in class doesn't have to be the thing. And if you can actually actively encourage students to think in non-essay ways and submit in non-essay ways, they may find themselves more comfortable because they're so accustomed to writing in school that they don't really have that option until they're encouraged to do it. But then it also, you can kind of tell if they did it with AI or not. Like if it's a 3-paragraph essay that has a bunch of superlative adjectives in it, then and there's no supporting documentation or no video links or no resources or anything, then it's like, okay, maybe not. But if they threw in a hand-drawn picture of their notes or something like that, of a mind map they built or something like that, then you get a little more feel for what it actually looked like.
Yeah, And I can echo on the videos. I mean, something which I was quite shameless about is I actually copied all the links to, external tutorials for particular things that students found helpful, because I thought, okay, that's a good repository to keep. So when I teach the class again, I kind of already have it, right? I have like here are videos that have helped other students in the past understand this better. So it actually gave me quite a few interesting links as well for good instructional videos in the area. So that was good.
Do you prompt students explicitly to provide that for you, or are they just anecdotally tossing in and being like, I found this helpful? Or are you saying, if you found something helpful, please provide it?
Yeah, in the syllabus, I have a sentence there that says, like, you can share, for example, videos or articles online that you found helpful. And that probably brought a lot of them to the idea of like, hey, yeah, I can do this, right? So um, I do encourage it.
I really liked how you were saying earlier about how a lot of the discussions were then prompting further discussions in the classroom. So it was kind of mapping out the course a little bit. Peter, I was wondering, I know that you mentioned to me about you try to take a lot of the real practical world concepts into your discussions where you're more academic in the classroom. It was that coming from that type of the students saying we want more practical everyday application to what we're talking about?
Peter, don't forget to introduce yourself as well. We
Yeah,
should have done that at the start. We were going to do it in phases, but then it all just kind of mended together.
No worries. Yeah, that actually, well, I think that's a good lead in actually as well too. So my name is Peter Commons. I'm new to teaching. I've been teaching at the university for 4 years, but my entire career has been as a software developer and as a software and product leader. I've been at a lot of different companies, including a big one named after a large river and a bunch of other stuff too. And so when I came into the world of teaching, which is something I've always enjoyed, even when I was at a leader, I would always volunteer to teach classes. If people have heard of something called Agile project management, I was actually a teacher of that, and taught little, 2-hour classes on that. But it's only in the last 4 years that I've become a full-time instructor. But the point is, I come from the real world. And so for me, the academic thing of like, oh, you need to learn how to do something is great. Totally agree with that. But I apply it to the real world. So the two classes I teach are project management and product management. Project management, of course, is how to make sure a project is on budget and on time and all the stuff that goes into that. Product management is how do we decide and choose which product we're going to build to make sure that our customers are happy with it, as well as make sure it gets built on time and all the rest of it as well too. I jokingly like to say, but I think there is definitely a negative truth to it. These two courses, or topics, I should say, are much more real world applicable. If I teach you how to do a machine learning coding and you're a machine learning engineer and your boss gives you a job to do that, you just write your code and you're done. If you're a project manager, you're dealing with I always talk about the boss person, with a boss person, and how do I actually get that boss person to listen to and understand what's going on? So psychology, communication, you come up with the best argument and you present it to your boss, and your boss just says no, and you're like, what do I do now? And so I really try to make sure people think about, okay, great, this are some techniques, tools, methodologies to do this in the right way, to get good data-driven thinking, all the stuff that helps build that up. But then how does it play out in the real world? And so when I look at putting the discussions together, this is a great opportunity, building on everything Enno has said. I want people to be able to contribute. I want the introverted thinkers and the extroverted thinkers to all have a level playing field. I want people to learn from each other, but I want them to apply it to a real world situation, to like think of a situation where you were in this case, the example posted up here, you were a project manager, or maybe you were just on a project and you saw the project manager doing it. How did things play out in the real world? And it really helps bring folks more connection to that. One of the favorite things I love to have people say, and I actually luckily get this all the time, is I teach the class, and literally while I'm teaching the class, someone will say, for the people that are actually still working at the time, hey, I was just in my work situation. I just used your thing yesterday, and oh my God, things went a little bit better or differently as well too. And so that's really kind of nice to see, but kind of having this chance to say in the real world, how does it actually play out? Help people take the classroom learning and apply it to the real world situation, and and see how it plays out. And also just, I mean, in terms of engagement, you guys talked about this at the very beginning. people are more engaged when they talk about stuff that they care about. And I like to come up with fun little examples in class that usually have sort of playability and all the rest of it. We, in our product management class, we create something called the Poopinator, which is a poop cleaning product. And it's kind of silly, everyone laughs, but people get engaged. But it's still, do I really care about this or not? But when someone says, oh, here's a product I use, why do I think it actually works for the customer or something else? And that's for the product class and the project class. You know, everything's a project, right? You plan a wedding, it's a project. You're working on your final paper with your 5 team members on your class, it's a project. Of course, things at work are projects. And so thinking about that and how I can apply it really challenges people to, again, think about the challenges, but also, again, I always remind them, you learn the tool, it's in this nice little setting. Now, when you apply it to the real world, you might have to tweak it a little bit to kind of actually make it work. And it's pushing them to do that. And then, of course, having people read each other's comments has them learn from that as well, which is really cool. And as I intimated, my background is all high-tech software development. So I worked in a number of industries, but all of them doing coding and lots of, you know, software development and so on. I get a lot of people from a lot of different areas as well too. And so kind of like what Enno said, I'm learning from the class. And so I get people to bring in examples from working at Brunswick, that they manufacture like boats and motors and stuff like that, or Alliant Energy, or any one of a number of other companies that are not high-tech related, which is a super good building of the content. And I do the same thing Enno does. I leverage good examples in the future for future classes to bring out my knowledge in other areas. But again, you just get this wealth of different perspectives on how to apply things to the real world across a whole bunch of different industries, more industries than even my 30 years of experience prior to teaching brought myself. Because again, I had a limited scope, as we all do, because we can only do so many jobs in our career.
Very cool. And no, I don't, was it relate? You were telling me earlier about project work that your students were doing. Is that part of the class that you were just teaching, or is that unrelated to the?
No, I just as we were talking earlier, our business analytics students have to do an applied project in their second semester, which is now. And I had all of them in my machine learning class, and you know, a lot of these projects involve some form of machine learning. So inevitably, I am the instructor that they go to with questions. Peter is actually supervising some of these projects, so he knows them better. But I'm currently in the middle of getting, I don't know, 4 or 5 emails every week with like, can you explain to us again how to do this? I'm like,
I did not realize there was crossover. That's fascinating. So Peter, you're helping them manage the projects they're working on across their career. Is that correct?
No, the University of Wisconsin has a strong focus on giving all the students the opportunity to try a practicum or a capstone. There are different terms for it, but basically the idea is we find an external company that has a project, and the project, if it's analytics students, business analytics students, it's a business analytics project. I also work on another program where we actually partner CS students, computer science students, with some of my product management students, and they work on literally a product management of a computer science project. But again, it's always for a real world company that has basically, you know, they don't pay the students. It's just part of the program that's kind of built in, but they get learning and they get mentorship from me, from folks like Enno and others to kind of work through it to, it's not full real world. It's kind of like real world light, but it is working with an actual company. And they have, you know, just like I was saying, all the fun challenges. I was just teaching class on Tuesday and they're like, the person never shows up for meetings. What do I do? And, you know, so we have that discussion, you know, all the things that normally happen in a real world situation. So that's what we're talking about here.
Okay, cool. I did not realize there was crossover, and that's fascinating. So sorry to take us down that rabbit hole a little bit, but and so then I'm wondering now, with the real world scenarios thing, like, did you have a method to do? Oh, I guess you're new to teaching for 4 years. Have you been doing discussions like this in real world all 4 years in your class?
I have, yes. I mean, when I take on a new thing, I learn a whole lot. Enno was actually one of my teachers, among others, and I just asked a whole lot of questions. But also, I just had that mindset of like, how do I make it feel real world? It's like the idea of giving people a nice little assignment that has a perfect answer at the end is, I mean, it's a great way of teaching and it teaches core concepts. But then you get into the real world and like, okay, great. It doesn't fit into this nice little box like the problem Peter taught me in class does. What do I do? And so from the very beginning, I was like, how do I make this, how do I push people's envelopes, if that's the right way to say it, of to kind of go beyond that? And so, yeah, no, I started from the very beginning But again, Enno and others were teachers. I took there's a program we have on how to do discussions well. I took that program and basically kind of looked at and learned all I could, and definitely have seen the benefits from doing this from the very beginning, and definitely tuned it. And I will give you guys a plug. Harmonize definitely makes it easier and better to do discussions than some of the other discussion tools I've used.
Appreciate that. Before we pivot into logistics, does anyone have any questions left or back and forth, or any questions from the audience as well on this topic of real world? Because this gets more into the authentic assessment side of things, which is super important. Also kind of helps sidestep the AI thing. I'm just going to keep people are so focused on that nowadays that if you're making them or encouraging them to tie it to something in their own life, it's also another great way for them to just not want to use AI as much, or maybe they use AI to brainstorm or something along those lines. But it's a good plug there as well. All right, so maybe back into logistics, maybe both for starting with Enno, but and Peter. I think you were one that people often wonder, like, how much effort does this take? How do I fit this into the class? Like, what is the burden on me as the instructor? Because instructors it's always a question of how much time do you have to devote to any particular teaching practice. So, and then David, I jumped in because I can't help myself. You were right, that was going to happen. Were there's anything else on these topics you wanted to cover as well?
Yeah, perfect transition. I feel like one thing that I saw when I was creating our demos, which Marcus, thank you for pointing out that we're not sharing actual student data, so this are just examples. Was you seem to really interact a lot with the students, whether that's comments or reactions to their posts and comments. Do you feel like that is helping in driving up the numbers of them participating?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think everybody here in this room knows that unless you put structures in place, it's very easy for students to ignore things, right? So if there's just a discussion forum, and you don't have, you know, maybe some percentage of their grades, some expectations attached to it, it will die rather quickly. So I knew I had to keep people engaged, and I also knew that if they see that I'm actually reading it, I'm looking there, I'm commenting, they'll pay extra attention, right? So that was essentially what I did. The first part is I attached 10% of their grade to the discussion forum. So it was a very simple way of grading. I said you have to do one post and two comments. And Harmonize allows you to basically automatically check whether they do that. And then as long as they do that, persistently through the semester, they get, basically the full grade for discussion forum contributions. And that's a pure kind of quantity assessment, if you will, right? That's really just, do they post something and do they comment on something? And but I felt that was by itself therefore a bit insufficient, because I also wanted to have some incentives for quality. So I introduced what I called knowledge sharing points, where I said throughout the semester, you can earn 5 of these points. That's what takes you from 95% of a grade to 100% of a grade. And I'll give you these points when I see posts in the forum or contributions in the classroom where I really think that your peers in the classroom have benefited and learned from that. And that the problem when you do this is always you kind of set yourself up, because it's somewhat judgmental, but I don't think there's an easy way sort of around it, right? So you actually have to be engaged, and you have to find yourself some criteria. So that the first thing is I was always looking for originality. So if somebody was posting something that I'd already seen 3 or 4 times already in the discussion forum, then obviously that's not an extra point anymore, right? If somebody is just very clearly posting something that they've just asked ChatGPT, then I wouldn't give points for that either. So I was looking usually for something unique. If they found some unique video, something that was really, really helpful. Yeah, sometimes here they found like a comic. So I was looking for sort of genuine innovative things that I knew would get the attention of their peers. And every Sunday, I would log in, and I told students that that's exactly what I'm going to do. Every Sunday afternoon, I'm going to get myself a cup of coffee, and I'm going to read discussion forums for 2 hours. Now I have 150 students, right? So this is a lot of student comments that I would get, but yeah, that would take me, I would say, an hour and a half to 2 hours every Sunday. Read the discussion forum posts, assign extra points, comment here and there, right? Or mark things as insightful, or just kind of interact with it, right? So that the students see, oh, Enno is engaged in this forum, so I really should pay attention to it. And that overall worked. I do believe I got a majority of students to contribute to the forum in meaningful ways. There was also the time, Harmonize, of course, has tools available where you can track how engaged they are with the forum. You can see how much they read, how often they log in, essentially. So you get a bunch of statistics, and you get sort of a warning when a student seems to be at risk, right? And so every Sunday, I'd sort of go through these statistics, see is there a student that is at risk, and I would just send them a short message that says, hey, you were flagged in the Harmonized discussion forums for low engagement. Usually I think there's some graph as well that I sometimes sort of copy and pasted to them. And I was like, I just wanted to make sure that everything's all right, that you find it easy to use, etc. So I would sort of frame it like this. Again, this doesn't necessarily, as long as they did their one post and 2 comments, this didn't really drop their grades, but I think it made them feel of like, oh, this is actually tracking what I do. So, maybe I should pay more attention to it, right? So just sort of a simple nudge like this would usually jolt them out of inactivity, and they'd send an apologetic message. Sometimes it was just because they were sick, or they were traveling, or whatever it was. So so these were all techniques I used to kind of keep them engaged with the forum, made sure that they recognized the importance of it. Maybe another key thing that I've learned, and I learned this earlier in a different class, is that I've actually used a separate forum for all 3 sections. So I have 3 sections with 50 students each. I could have collapsed them all into a single discussion forum, but that would have been overwhelming. And I had gotten this feedback before. I think sort of there's a natural limit of just keeping these forums to 50 or 60 students. Otherwise, they grow in terms of content so much. Yeah, so, and this worked out pretty well. Again, class was always on Tuesday. By sort of, I would see a lot of comments coming in by Friday and Saturday, and then Sunday morning. So by Saturday afternoon, I would say 60 to 70% of students had contributed. That was also good. I gave them a talk in the classroom that if you post in the forum on Monday evening, the number of people who are going to read what you post is going to be pretty minimal, right? So you have to coach them a little bit on, if you want people to read what you have to say, you should better say it earlier rather than later. And so I had to put in some discipline, that they post early, that they engage early, and with a couple of exceptions, I think overall that worked pretty well.
I remember you saying to me that you felt like you got up to about 85% participation from your students, that you thought that was a little low. And I remember Marcus chuckling, going, wow, if we could all get 85% participation. But I know you were actually saying that you really want to try to get that to 100% to have them all engaged. I just want to make that observation. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, the vast majority of them were posting, and were posting meaningful things. And but that's sort of with a little bit of nudging throughout the semester, right? So some of them from day one took this very seriously. I actually have one student, she recently asked me to write her a letter of recommendation, which I gladly did, because she would literally take every discussion forum post as an opportunity to write a short essay about something. She would, do her research and write a really, really thoughtful essay on the topic that I actually look forward to reading. I was like, oh, here's the student. I got to read what she posted because it's always awesome. And you know what? That's what I put into her letter of recommendation. It's like, this student really stood out because of that, right? So, and I'm going to tell this story to future students so that they realize, hey, if you're looking for a chance to stand out in the classroom, for me to also remember you by, and for your peers to remember you by, this is it, and so I think that's quite powerful.
One final question before we pivot over to Peter on this. What percentage of your students earned that extra, I forget what you called them, the 5 points of
the knowledge sharing points? So all 5 points, I think that was probably about 60% or so who earned all 5 points, and the remaining had like 3 or 4. So they were pretty high up there. It wasn't meant to be differentiating. It was just meant to give them just sort of an extra motivation to not just write something silly and post that, right?
Well, it sends the message as well that you as the instructor were willing to spend time on this. It was important, and it contributes to their grade, so it's important. So think about why it's important, and
yes,
and go from there. All right, Peter, over to you. Like, how did you deal with this extra sort of workload? How does it fit in, and all of that jazz?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Enno said applies to me as well too. The one post and 2 comments thing is something that I started a couple of years ago, as soon as I started using Harmonize at the very beginning. And what I love about Harmonize is you can set different due dates for that. And kind of in an enforcing way, Enno encouraged his students to post early to get more comments. I required students to post early in order to encourage getting more comments. And so if let's say the discussion is due on a Friday, then I will say 3 days earlier, I will set a previous milestone using the Harmonize tool to do that, and say you must have your post done 3 days in advance. And that's basically a forcing function to make sure people are there. And you talked about 85% participation. If you ask how many of my students have 1 post and 2 comments, it's 100% because they get graded on it, and it's a small portion of their grade. Now, how many people go more than that? That kind of depends as well too. But at least in a constructive, forcing way, I see, I have people do that. And again, I go through, I do comment and stuff. I'm going to give Enno the props. He does more of that than I do. But definitely love going in and reading when I can. By having the automatic grading based on content and timeline and so on, you kind of get that for free. Obviously, you need to go in and check. I have not seen a single student yet go blah, 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 blah to get to their word count. I'm sure I'll see it at some point, but I haven't seen that yet. I do validate and check that. And I also, given I have time, will read and comment and like and favorite things as well too, as appropriate. But Harmonize, again, has those nice little mechanisms. So I can not only say that, but I can also encourage it, because let's be honest, students, as we said before, tend to, do the minimum at most point. Enno's a student who writes the essay. She's great, and I love those students when I have them as well too. But obviously, it's a bell curve of students, and you get a lot of them who will do just the bare minimum. But if they have to read a couple other people's things and comment on them, and again, the comments are always interesting and thoughtful, and definitely demonstrate the students are not learning just from me. They're also learning from their peers. And again, I hate to use the word, but enforce it a little bit. In addition to encouraging it in class. The other thing I will do is after a discussion, I'll comment on stuff as well too, but after a discussion, I'll go through and read some of them. And if I find that are interesting, I'll actually in class afterwards say, by the way, in reading discussions, there were a couple really good examples of blah, blah, whatever it was that the topic was about. And I'll actually share those. I usually won't cite the student just to be polite and not make people be on the spot, but I'll highlight some of the key concepts or ideas about, again, usually it's a real world application. So like, here's a great example someone came up with about how you could do better task estimation in the real world, or whatever the topic happens to be. And so I'll bring it back into the classroom a little bit as well.
Interesting. Um, I, Peter, you brought up something that you're not sure about, beyond that one post and two comments. Um, uh, maybe Marcus, if you want to share a little bit, or Peter, you both were looking earlier today about some of the data that you're seeing on the overall engagement within the classes. Maybe talk a little bit about that. Maybe even give Enno and Peter here some insights about how well they're doing uh, in
You're
that
putting me on the
interactivity.
spot for on-the-fly data analytics. How
There you
about I
go.
back out and talk about the stuff we've analyzed generally? Um, your students will do what you ask them to do at a bare minimum, and there is an inflection point. So like one post and two comments generally causes some students to go above and beyond. One post, three comments causes more students to go above and beyond one post and three comments. And we have not seen it tail off in reality because, and I'm going to guess as to the psychology of this, peer responses cause a little bit of peer pressure to then turn around and respond. So if you ask for one post and one comment, you're going to only get one post and one comment. Very few students are going to exceed that. More students will exceed it the more you ask of them. Obviously, it's a balancing act. You don't want to create artificial conversations and such. You have to set up an activity that encourages that level of back and forth, almost peer critique type of thing. But when you go and ask more of them, I don't know where the one post two comment came from in our higher ed world, but it is sort of the norm. The data looks better at one post three, one post four in terms of students than carrying on and doing more. I'm assuming the psychology of peer pressure as why I have no way to interview the students and be like, tell me, why did you respond to that more? But that's what we see in the data with that. So it's an interesting thing. Don't ask too little of your students. That's what I would say. I almost want to turn off the ability to do one post and one comment because it actually seems to shut down conversation. You get more conversation from not putting any requirements on your students because there's an unknown expectation of what's for you than if you ask for one post and one comment. I can't turn it off, of course, because some people are using it for peer critique and want have special cases for it. But from a pure conversation perspective, like ask more of your students if you want to have them devote more time to this and you find value in it, and you'll get it, type of thing. Was that David? Were there any other points you asked me to cover in that or in their particular classes? I'm not going to go into their particular classes and be like, well,
Yeah.
well, Peter, let's compare you to Enno.
I would, Billy, if you want to come on, if you want to give any insights about what you see from this compared to other classes or things like that you see in the way that Peter and Enno are doing this.
I'd be glad to. It's always exciting and fun to see and hear actually from the instructor how they're doing this because I can sort of get an idea and sense to look into the activities and see how they're set up and so on. And I think actually that's credit to the tool itself. I'm speaking from a technical support lens, and I will say that both Peter and Enno, they got standard evaluation. They received, this is how you log in, this is your option, this is what this does, this is what that does, and they took it and they so just to use an analogy, they played the music with the instrument and they learned the instrument pretty quickly, and they, that's credit to the way the software is designed. I think it's really flexible. It's the evaluation, the data dashboards, I really am enjoying. It's a good thing. Nothing deep there, just an observation. When you have a tool that's implemented to 40 instructors throughout a school, and it's sort of a unique tool, and you never receive any requests as to this is broken or how does this work, or my students are confused, that's a positive thing.
We also
Yeah, I mean,
hard not to tell teachers how to teach. If you notice, Peter and Enno were doing completely different things with the multiple due dates, and that's just their choice, right? So, Enno, you were going to say something.
yeah, I mean, again, since this was sort of my first year out of the dean's office, and I had to learn a bunch of tools, right? So I learned Harmonize, but as Billy knows, there's I think at least 3 other tools that I had to learn as well. Harmonize was the least difficult one to learn. So, like my error rate with the others was a whole lot higher. So This was not cumbersome at all. I feel that the tool itself was very intuitive, and I very quickly got it to do the things that I wanted it to do. So
That's awesome. Thank you for saying that. Any questions from the audience? I have a little bit of time left to be able to take questions. People feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I give while we're waiting to see if anyone asks. I see there's something came in the Q&A. Oh, did you need to train students how to use Harmonize? How did you introduce this tool to your class? I guess I don't know if you guys picked that up and touched on that. Is that why you guys were discussing that? I didn't even see that question come in. Did you do anything additional with your students, I guess, is the open question.
I think in class, I opened it up once I showed them how to get to it through Canvas. And that was it. I never had not a single student email that came, I don't know how to post, or I don't know what to do with the tool. I think they're all very familiar with this kind of interface. So I did a very, very brief introduction. Peter, how about you?
Yeah, the same. I mean, I don't think I don't usually even bring it up. I just mentioned it's there because it's fully integrated into Canvas. It just looks like a regular assignment, and it has, and you can, respond in all the normal ways. So I think the students just discovered, and it's a nice, easy to use, multimedia interface, and students use enough of those on a regular basis that, and Harmonize is definitely, easy to use in that fashion. So I don't think I've ever had a question about how to do Harmonize either.
Kind of in the same vein of that, did you do any special instruction at the beginning of classes to talk about we're doing online discussions in an in-person class? Did you prep the students in any way for that? Because I guess you both said you really didn't think that was something uncommon, but was there any discussion to set them up for success?
Oh, I definitely do that. Definitely say, you learn in multiple ways. You learn from your peers. We'll do that in class a lot. My classes have probably, I would guess, 40% activities to 60% lectures, and maybe actually it's more like 50-50. I really, really focus on that a lot in what I do. But I say I want to get interaction in as many ways as possible. And so I tell them about it. I set up guidelines. I have a quick slide that I don't usually read all the bullet points, but remind folks to, be polite, have clear data, don't go on and on, say what you're saying in some just basic guidelines about how to do it. And then I set up the structure of saying, I'm going to expect you to post 3 days before the final due date. Make sure you mark that on your calendars, and then go back and review other people's stuff and respond to at least 2 other ones. I think it's going to be 3 or 4 now. You guys have sold me on that. I might up that for next semester. But yeah, you definitely you need to teach them about how to do discussions and set the expectation, kind of like, we were saying with Enno as well too, showing that I care about it. And of course, there's also a grade as well too, makes them value it more.
I probably got the most questions about the knowledge sharing points, right? That was the least defined sort of aspect of the whole thing. And I talked about it on the very first day of class. I believe I sent out an announcement about it again on in the 3rd week of class, and again, I think in the 8th week of class. And I still had students at the very end, and I was like, how come I didn't get any knowledge sharing points, or what was that about? How could I get those points? So, I mean, that was the only part that was, I think a bit more complex. And again, that's also the only part where I got a few students who'd be like, I think I made a really great post over there, but you didn't give me a point for it. Can I get a point?
So, did you see the knowledge I shared?
It's kind of like that, right? So again, I think every instructor knows that the moment you have something that is a bit more judgmental, that's what you're going to get. So
yeah, that made me think of, I want to add in, Canvas announcements has a nice feature where you can delay announcements. And I definitely, especially in terms of encouraging the cadence to respond to stuff, I will create announcements, and I will create them in advance and then just have them auto-publish so that I don't forget them, and basically saying, hey, by the way, today's your final day to get that first post in for the first discussion. And I don't do that for every discussion, but I do use that feature a little bit as a reminder to, again, encourage the cadence, because the knowledge sharing points, I could see so many students being like, but I thought it was really cool. I get a lot of students saying, you didn't tell me that I had to get my post in by Thursday. And And like, I still usually give them the benefit of the doubt for the first one, but, and then they learn after that. But it's like, literally, I've told them like 5 times. But you have to get them in the habit. And as a good project management teacher, I say, get it on your calendar as a reminder, because otherwise you'll forget. And then they do that, and then it's really
It
good.
should automatically put them in the course calendar too. So if you don't automatically see them in the course calendar, hit us up. Not that they pay attention.
The number of students that miss deadlines that are in the course calendar, I mean, it's 2%, but it's like, how on earth could
Yeah.
you possibly miss this? And of course, in the real world, reminders are not nearly as automatic as Canvas is. Canvas is pretty darn good about that, using the integration of Harmonize and other tools. So
I love the fact that you're in a timeline project management class as well. And they're just like, well, wait, what? I had to lay out tasks on a timeline? I'm like, why, yes, you did. You had to read the calendar. But anyway, I think we're at wrap up point here. If anyone has any questions, get them in. As we started joking, I saw some folks started to head on out of the webinar into there. Apparently we weren't as funny as we thought we were towards the end.
I do want to take the time really quickly before we end things to just thank Billy and Peter and Enno, all 3 of you. This has been very helpful and insightful, and just for you to take the time to come on and share this with others, around the country, around the world, whoever is going to see this later. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that.
Same. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Pleasure.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
I always like to stay and just see if there's any last minute questions.
I think it's just us. I think we're all good.
I
There's
think
two attendees left. Yep.
that's it. That's all. Thank you so much, Billy and Peter. I'll be sending out the recording to everyone, and I'll see if I can remember to send you that link as well, so you guys can share it out if you'd like to share it out with anybody.
Fantastic.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank
All
you,
right,
David.
thanks, guys. Have a great afternoon, or have a
Thanks.
great night, Enno, there in Bath.
Exactly. All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Wow.
Bye.